Let's go on a mountain bike ramble and talk about geometry. Today I will have Paul Aston on the podcast from TESTPILOT, and we will talk about the geometry and how it evolved in the last, let's say, 30, 40 years. He will explain his very first light bulb. He called it his light bulb moment when he changed a bike he totally hated by adjusting some parts of the geometry and made it actually work to turn it into the bike which was like the best bike ever. After that, he worked with the likes of Chris Porter with Geometron bikes and had literally pushed the reaches far out and what used to be described as non-rideable. He started his own independent bike review site like Aston MTB.bike, and when he started his site, he bought 5 bikes to review and broke all frames. So he was really annoyed by the bike industry and went on to pursue his very own way, build his own bikes. So this is the TESTPILOT podcast, and enjoy this episode with Paul Aston. When you got inspired and we both went in the same route of actually not believing what we've been told at press camps. About this is the greatest geometry, the greatest bike ever. You will have the most fun on the trail. And we got only incremental improvements from model year to model year. And you're also 6'3" kind of.
No, less. I'm just over 6 foot, 185.
Okay.
But I've got very long monkey arms.
So monkey. Index,
my arms are way too long.
In the end, you figured that there is a problem with geometry.
Playing around with a lot of bikes for years, really. I guess I started experimenting in about 2006 or 7. And I remember the first bike I had a real breakthrough with was a MSC F5. And I think I had that in 2009. And I had it for a year. And I was like, this bike is junk. Like, I hate it. I can't ride it. I was going to a lot of races at the time. And then the end of that season, I was like, right, I really need to get a new bike because this bike sucks and it's holding me back. And then I tried to sell it. I couldn't sell it. I didn't really have enough money to buy a new one. And it sort of dragged on into the next season. And I was like, right, I've got to sort this bike out because I'm not in a position to change it for a new bike, so I'll need to change the way it works. And I just started experimenting with like angle set, different stem lengths. I started working with Nigel Reeve, NSR Racing. This was before he was working with Nathan Rennie, Stevie Smith, sort of when Nigel was starting off his career, I suppose.
So this was during your World Cup time, right?
No, this was after.
After already, okay.
Yeah. I didn't really do. I did a little bit of World Cup time, 2006 to 2008. So this was after that. Basically, in a few weeks, 4, 5, 6 weeks, transformed the bike that I just hated and couldn't get on with at all into the best bike I'd ever had at the time. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. I'm like, instead of struggling to ride, like battling the bike, no confidence. Sometimes you have a good day. Most of the days were a bad day. It went to like, good day every day, good run. Always feel confident. I'm pushing harder. Starting to feel the flow. It's not a battle every day to get warmed up and put some good runs in. And then after that, I sort of carried on trying a few things, playing around with bikes, talking to people about different things. Then I got the job for Bike Magic Dirt Magazine. Started going to some press events for them, writing a few articles. And then Enduro was kicking off around this time. So I started racing some Enduro. And again, like changing more bikes, trying different kinds of bikes. But the real big one was when I was working for Pink Bike and the Geometron. I rode the Geometron. And that was like, oh, this is it. this is the one, finally. And yeah, basically I just saw some articles in MBR, I think it was, from Danny Milner and Alan Muldoon, who'd been riding it. I was like, wow, we've got to go down and drive down and go to Mojo, get on this bike, see what it's like. So I set that up to go and do a test riding day when I rode it. Kicked off to a great start with Chris Porter. I was slightly hungover when I turned up from drinking too much red wine with the photographer, the guy that's going to be taking the photographs the night before. And I turned up and I was just like, oh my God, all nervous. Got to like pull off this test. And Chris came in also just like shaking, just like, I went a bit deep on the Rioja last night. So yeah, started off well there, but got on the bike. And yeah, it was like a light bulb moment. This is finally it. Like, my back doesn't hurt. I feel comfortable. You don't have to like lean back a lot on steep stuff, and you can keep your weight more in the middle. You're not having to like hunch forward and sit right on the nose of your saddle to keep the front wheel down when you're climbing. Just drops into corners really nicely. All those things that we now take for granted, know as normal. So yeah, that was a real light bulb moment, the Geometron. And then, well, nothing really happened after that until now. The pole was quite an interesting one, but the pole was basically an identical copy of the 29-inch Geometron. Identical geometry, almost a copy and paste. And I had one of those for a few years. That was really good. And then, I can't remember specifics, but a lot of other bikes were sort of slowly catching up. But I think that first Geometron was 2015, off the top of my head. Maybe late 14. So nearly 10 years ago, essentially. 9 to 10 years ago. And then the battle after riding that bike and the pole was just getting on to any other bike that I felt comfortable with. So I'm sure you've been through the same thing, especially being tall.
Yeah.
It's like once you go, you can't go back, as the expression goes. And now I got this thing into my head where it was like, it's like the MSC. Once you've got the bike set up right for you, everything's easy. You can ride, you're comfortable, you're confident, it fits well. And then you go back to the badly set up bike and it's super difficult, really hard to ride, kills your confidence, kills your flow, scares you, takes away the enjoyment of it. So yeah, basically since then, just waiting for more bikes to arrive that were a suitable size. And then, yeah, over the years, a lot more suitably sized bikes came out. And then not just the size, like the whole geometry package. And yeah, so that was the main part of the story until I started doing my stupid ideas.
Just stupid ideas. Maybe you ended the relationship with Pink Bike at some point and came up with a pretty interesting idea of making independent bike reviews, like really, really independent in the kind of that your readers somehow financing your work via raffles.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
So you're getting the products, or you're actually buying those, and you don't have any bias because you need to keep a company happy because they spent a couple of grand on you to review their product.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting concept in the first place at all, but you're also taking it to the next level. Again, under this kind of umbrella, you build the next bike.
Yeah, well, that wasn't my plan. It evolved. And originally, I didn't have any ideas my longer term idea was to build some custom bikes. Because I basically got the idea for the raffles from a guy on YouTube. I don't know if you know him. It's called Matt Armstrong BMX, and he was a pro BMX rider, and then he got into doing car repair videos.
Okay.
And they really kicked off. He bought a Bentley. He bought the cheapest Bentley in the UK that had been smashed in a car crash. And he bought it for like $9,000 or $10,000. And then started rebuilding it and started doing a series about rebuilding this Bentley. And he went from having a smashed Bentley to then one that was drivable. And then he started tuning it and putting like body kits on it and wheels and turbos and all sorts of stuff. And that's when he sort of really kicked off. And then he raffled that car. And then he sort of got on from there to, now he's gone crazy. He must have 30 or 40 cars, like Lamborghinis with custom twin turbo kits and just ridiculous stuff, like custom wraps, custom machined wheels, like really, really high end stuff. So in the beginning, I was thinking that interesting custom bikes along the line would be a good idea, but I'm going to start off with run-of-the-mill stuff. So I started off buying with my own money some normal bikes, and I basically just broke all of them. And not like trying to break them, just I wasn't even riding them that much. I was spending most of my time building them,
maybe we need to.
them.
We also need to point out that you're now living in Finale Ligure. So this place is also
nearby.
hard on parts.
Yeah, nearby. Yeah,
you have to admit that. So like, there's a lot of rocks, and you're not a slow rider, I would say.
No, but I don't think that's an excuse. That's not an excuse because all the bikes that I was riding are marketed as EWS capable winning bike or tested by Pro Rider X at downhill track Y. So I'm not doing anything extraordinary. I'm literally going to like the home of enduro. So an enduro bike in that case should be able to hold up to those trails. And yeah, I'd say I'm a pretty fast rider, but I'm not very heavy. I'm 69 kilos at the moment.
Okay.
I'm very smooth. Nowadays, I used to be pretty loose and just huck off everything, but I would say I'm an exceptionally smooth rider nowadays. Very calculated compared to what I used to be like. And I've got a load of metalwork in my arm after a big crash a few years ago, so like I can't really do really big, drops or jumps because my arm will just collapse, and I'm just not really strong enough or young enough to be doing that anymore. But basically, all the bikes broke, and yeah, I was in like a crisis scenario. I was like, well, I bought 5 bikes, spent 25 to 30 grand, my own money and money borrowed from my dad to buy these bikes, and they're all broken. I've got nothing to ride. So I had 2 Commensals that were broken on the front end, and my idea at the time was to get myself out of this situation. There's a guy, Nico, who lives near Morzine, Esury Bikes, who I got lined up. He was going to build me a replacement steel front triangle for the Commensal. We're just going to take the Commensal swing arm, the linkage, and transfer it to that bike. And then had a bit of an awkward back and forward with Commensal, which annoyed me quite a bit. And at the same time, or like a week before we were going to do the build, Nico posted a picture of this like semi-high pivot full suspension bike on his Instagram. And prior to that, they were like, it's like a gravel bike, dirt jump bike, hardtail mountain bike. I think he'd done a couple of short travel, single pivot, full suspension bikes. And yeah, posted the picture of this semi-high pivot bike. I was like, that's the one I want, but with different geometry. was like, this is something I wanted for ages. I just messaged him on Instagram. It's like, instead of making the front end for the common cell, could you just make me a complete bike like that? Yep, no problem. Which is great, because I've talked to loads of frame builders in the past about trying to get custom bikes built, and I'm sure you've been through this. It's really difficult to get them to build what you want, even if you're paying. And I'm not criticising any frame builders, but most of them, they've got their own idea of what they want, and they've done their own testing, and they've got their own trails that they want it.
And they maybe even don't have the jigs to actually make the length, and we're potentially getting to that shortly.
Yeah. And he was great. He was just like, yeah, I'll make one next week.
Okay.
So then I sent him my specs, and I matched all the specs of that frame to all the spare parts that I got from the two common cell bikes. Like same BB, same dropout, same brake mount, seat tube size, all those things. And sent him my geometry. And I was expecting...
I know.
Expecting the answer that you get from everyone else. No, mate, that won't work. We've done all our testing. The short chainstay is mint. It's like, I appreciate what you're saying, but can you just make me what I want? Because I want to try it. Oh, no, mate, you'll never go around corners. Like that. The usual. It's like, yeah, but I'm paying you my money. Can you make it? But Nico was different. He's just like, yeah. Well, his first email was, are you sure you want these numbers? Because he's like, I'm not saying I'm not going to build it. But are you sure? Because it doesn't look right to me.
Yeah.
And he's like, before I make it, can you just like look at these numbers and write next to it like, yes, I definitely want a 500 millimeter chainstay. 1 week later, he welded it from nothing, built it up from nothing. Went and picked it up, built it, looked at it, and was like, oh my God, like, what have you done? Like, and the reason why I went with him, he quoted me, I can't remember now, I think it was like 1,800 euros. He did me a little bit of a deal. And we didn't have any paint, and some of the finishing touches weren't done. I think there's no welded on seat clamp. There was no cable guides, I think, in the beginning. So it's just really basic. And it didn't have an axle or an idler wheel with it. So yeah, really good price. And it was way cheaper than literally any other frame I could buy at the time. And this was like peak COVID bike rush. So you couldn't buy anything anyway. So it's almost like, this is the only chance I've got to get a working bike for the rest of the summer. So I've got to go for it. Got it, built it up, rode it down the road in Morzine to the lift. Just like... like you're in a bad situation, but you've really like dug yourself a really deep hole now that you can have to, there's no way out of. And I reckon 4 turns, I know the Plenty really well. I used to live in Morzine for years. 4th turn on it, I was like, that's it, done it. Don't need to change anything. Like, got to the end of the run. That was one of the best runs of my whole life. Brand new bike. Never felt so comfortable. Never turned so easy. Never moved so little on the bike. Backwards and forwards. And I was like, wow, that's really impressive. First run. Really sort of different setup. And yeah. As a test rider, if you get that on your first run, you're off to a really good start because you know that you still got a long way to go to fine tune it, get used to it, adjust your technique, your body position. And yeah, that was it. But also, like, just the first time, I've got nothing that I would change. I was like, I've completed it. Nothing to do, nothing to change.
Game over.
Game over. Like, well, almost don't know what to do now. And the thought of riding any other bike was not interesting at all. Yeah. So I think in a very long story, I've explained your first question, answered your first question.
So let's break those numbers. I will put that in an article like on top or in the description of this. But you say you have a 500 mil chainstay.
Yeah.
And reach wise, you're at?
That steel bike was 500 chainstay and reach.
Both. Like mirrored.
Well, I had that idea from when I had the MSC. That was a 450 reach, which is massive at the time, and a 450 chainstay.
Like Nukeproof did that for some time.
Yeah. And then I remember studying lots of different bike geometries. And I don't want anyone to quote me on any numbers on this, but back then, the average downhill bike size was about 440, 450, with a 440, 450 chainstay. And then the reaches started getting longer and longer around the Geometron time, but the chainstays stayed the same. And I don't think the reach should be the same as a chainstay. I just thought, just basic logic, if you've got a 450 reach and a 450 chainstay, and you make the reach 500, surely just make the chainstay 500 and start there, which is what I did. And actually it wasn't the first one, because before that steel bike, I'd had the custom built common cell, where I got some custom dropouts and shock linkage for it. And that had 495 static chainstay.
What kind of head angle you're pairing with that?
On my bike, 62.
And your travel wise, you have
200.
Front and rear, or?
Yeah. And 80 degree seat angle. And 0 mil BB drop on the first one.
On the common cell or on your current one?
Well, the common cell was 495 reach, 495 chainstay. And I can't remember the BB height off the top of my head. I think that was minus 10 or 15. But I think we changed from a 29 to a mullet. And I don't think we could get the BB any higher without making the head angle too steep. And then my first steel bike, it was 500, 500, 0 mil BB drop, 62 head angle, and 80 degree seat angle.
And you have a wheelbase of around 1400?
No, it's less. I don't know off the top of my head. I don't generally measure the wheelbase or worry about it. I think it's like 1385 maybe.
Yeah, it's not going all the way overboard.
Yeah. Well, I think the wheelbase is irrelevant, in my opinion.
The question is, and this is the reason I want to talk with you about that, you will not offer that as a production bike, will you? Or will you?
I would.
So
I would like
you
to.
You would. So if I would say now, okay, let's say I want to buy this, would you sell me one or get me one produced?
Yeah.
Okay. Have there been some more interest from people, or is this like
quite a few people actually? I've got a little short list of interested people. Which one day, if I ever make any production frames, I'll email them and try and sell them one. I know a number of people have built something really similar, either on their own or they've got a local frame builder. Edgery's made, I'm not sure now, 5, 6, 7 pretty similar machines. A few of them, I think people have made mistakes they've like copied part of my geometry, but not all of it, which I think is a common bike industry mistake. Like, I will just make the whole front end bigger and not worry about the rear. But yeah, I'll sell you one.
Do you think that
I can send you my bank details after this podcast, and I'll ship one of those bikes to you this afternoon?
Yeah, I'm on my way. I'm planning a trip to Italy, so maybe a visit at your place is on the list, I guess.
Yeah. Come by the farm.
Getting back to the bike, because I'm really curious now, because we both did the same thing. We started building our own bikes, a prototype kind of thing, which, like the very first iterations back 10 years ago, almost. It's like it was a bike of the future.
Yeah.
And everybody said we are crazy. Like, this is not rideable.
Yeah.
And then you saw it, and it's like you had a crystal ball, and you predicted the future. And they crept crawling, tiny baby steps towards this kind of geometry. I think some of it, and as you said, they're not copying or are not brave enough to do like the big leap and do it the right way. Like, okay, if I'm lengthen the reach, I might lengthen the rear, and then I also need to touch the head angle. And they're just like doing once at a time. And then what I learned from my testing and building prototypes is that people rely or listen to somewhat of what you may call a muscle memory in them.
Yeah.
So while you and I might be quite open to new influences or hopping on a bike, and even by doubting ourselves, like you did riding down to the lift in Morzine, the first ride on your concept bike, we are open to the experience we have while we're riding it, and not like thinking, oh, this might feel odd, and having somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And even though it's hard at sometimes at the beginning, because you need to, you pointed it out already, and you need to be a rider that's actually aware of it. Like, where is your center of gravity? What you might do differently to adapt to a different geometry, aka bike, to make it actually work, and what you might need to change. And people are not able to adapt to that. If you have a girlfriend and she maybe is a head shorter than you, and she drives your car, and or you would get into the car after she drove it, and it's like, sometimes it's like you wouldn't adjust the seat, or you wouldn't adjust the steering wheel or the mirrors. It's just like you're crammed in there and you just deal with it, and it sucks. You're not willing to change anything. And this is like the most people out there. And maybe this is holding up what I would maybe claim innovation.
That's one reason. I think there's more than one reason. Another reason that springs to mind is, and I don't want to sound too arrogant, but you need to be an expert level rider to be able to ride a bike and still have the brain capacity to be thinking about the bike and what's happening, as well as riding it and dealing with the trail and the rocks and the roots and the things. And the higher level of riding is, the more brain capacity you've got to understand how the bike's working, or as you said, how to move your center of gravity and how to adapt to things. And also, in the same sense, I'm not sure about you, but I've rode like all different kinds of bikes. Like I did BMX, dirt jumping, freestyle, 4-cross racing, cross-country racing, downhill racing, enduro racing, trials motorbike, mini motorbike, motocross bike. I haven't raced all those, but I've rode like all kinds of bikes, different types of bikes. And I've also been lucky enough to test ride loads of different mountain bikes. And the more different kinds of bikes you've rode, the more knowledge you've got to. So if you're a good rider and you've had a massive range of bikes that you've been fortunate to test, it's going to be much easier for you to understand a new bike and get used to it. Where if you're a guy with an average skill level and you've only ever rode cross country your whole life on like one style of bike, and then someone gives you a new bike which is much better at doing downhill, you're going to struggle to ride downhill on it just because you've never learned how to ride in that way. Where I think I could ride a modern downhill bike down a racetrack But if you gave me a 15-year-old downhill bike with completely different geometry and smaller wheels and stuff, I'd still be able to ride it down fairly similarly. I'd be terrified and much slower, but I could still ride it and be like, well, I feel like this because it's too small and and the wheels, and I need to lean back more coming into the slope. So yeah, there's lots of different variables. And as you said, like the car analogy, you got to get the handlebars right. You need to get your brake levers in the right position, your saddle in the right position, your suspension set right. Lots of different factors that can sort of affect your, how you feel, how you ride the bike.
To understand products and while you're testing them, I always use an example I like to tell is we can talk about what we feel on a bike and how it behaves, but we never ever can change our bodies, or switch our bodies. Like for instance, if I can never experience a bike maybe size small for a person that is maybe 160.
Yep.
1.60 m, or weights, or you say you weigh 69 kilos. I'm weighing 85-ish. So while this is not a major difference, it is a difference. And it makes the suspension and the tires and everything feel differently. So while I can explain to you how I experience how the tire is bending under a certain amount of pressure and how I ride, you can abstractly understand it, but you can't experience it. Yep. And this is a major problem. And I think, and I wonder what you think about like your bike and your skill set and your past and all the experience you collected with riding those different bikes. Do you think that this solution you found now for yourself, and let's say for a person having a similar kind of skill set or experience, would you think that a new rider, or no, maybe a new rider would have an easier time, but like an average Joe mountain biker riding regular stock mountain bike, stock geometry for years, now hopping on your bike would have the same aha light bulb moment, or would he be like, nah, that's not for me?
I don't know if they'd have the same light bulb moment, but I really think that nearly every rider would feel safer and more comfortable and be able to ride faster on my bike than another bike, a normal bike. Part of me is just starting to think that the geometry of most bikes has just been wrong for so long. Mm-hmm. And that I finally just got to like the correct geometry, and that's why I can't see any way to change it further. Mm-hmm. And I would compare it to motocross bikes. You don't get a beginner level motocross bike. They're all the same. You go to a motocross shop and they're all, which one do you want? The red one, the orange one, the yellow one, the blue one. Like, choose your brand colour that you like. If you want to spend €1,000 more, you buy the orange one because it's made in Austria.
Not anymore.
Yeah. But all the geometry is the same, essentially. And it's all about, it's like, that's the geometry, that's what works best, that's what corners best. That's got the best overall setup for going around a motocross track.
But by that analogy, you would put a person with 1.60 m on the same bike as you are riding.
Well, that's a slight difference in mountain biking, because I think the size makes more of a difference. You stud up more. On the motorbike, you're sitting a lot more and sliding. But on the motorbike, they're all standard. Mm-hmm. But people will spend a lot more time tuning the bike. So if you're a tall guy and you pick up your new 2024 KTM, you know straight away, I need to get the foot pegs that are lower and a bit further back and I need to get the handlebar mount clamp that's a bit higher and set forward. I need to get I'm not an expert on motocross at all, but I need to get the 5 centimeter rise seat, and I do those things, and I'll set it up for me. And if it's a 160 guy, he's like, I need to get the smaller clamp and the lower seat and the smaller bars and the higher pegs to fit it to me. But they're still riding the same shape bike. But yeah, the sizing is a difficult thing. I don't think we need so many sizes in mountain biking. I think a lot of brands could just have like a small and a large, and they could be adapted to fit a wider range of riders. Like a lot of brands that are doing 5-6 sizes with 10 or 15 mil difference in the reach. It's not changing a lot. And with things like angle sets and reach adjust headsets, you can get offset seat clamp. I can't remember what it's called. A guy in Switzerland, Drop Best. It's like an offset seat clamp to move your saddle forward or backwards. You can get shorter cranks or longer cranks. And yeah, you can tune the bike to the rider.
Do you think that the bike industry is maybe too fearful of change and innovation? Fearful of innovation, maybe?
Yeah, I've heard this direct from the horse's mouth, and I won't name a brand. I'm sure you were there on a press camp, but it was one brand who made really conservative bikes, and then they went and bought 2 Moto Geometrons, and then the next bike was quite a lot different, but not that different. It was like halfway from their traditional bike to the Geometron. I remember talking to the guys, like, hang on, you've rode the Geometron, so why haven't you made your bike like that? Oh yeah, well, it's just amazing, the Geometron, like absolutely amazing in every way, blah blah blah. We'd love to do that, but we can't do that because we've been telling people for years that this geometry is amazing, and we've been testing it with our race teams, and we've got this test center, and we're doing all this amazing stuff to make the amazing geometry. We can't just be like, actually, some bloke in Wales made a bike that was completely different, so now we've just copied that. Because they would look, first of all, they look like idiots. Second of all the previous customers who believed them and spent all the money on it will be like, hang on, I gave you 9,000 euros last year for a bike because you told me it was amazing, and now my brand new bike that I've only had a few months is now unrideable, out of date rubbish.
So you won't? They're trying to avoid to alienate their customers.
Yeah.
So and maybe okay. Let's make a theory. If people are down to buying a bike or dropping $9,000 like every other, let's say 4 to 5 years, then they have, with all the incremental changes, they will have somewhat of a significant change and feel an actual change. So the guy who bought a bike in 2015, buying another one in 2020, will not be alienated, but oh wow, this is actually better, and not felt light too.
Yeah, the overall problem that we've had, I believe, is, I'll have to use the motocross example. Mountain bikes evolved from road bikes. So I had road bikes, which was designed for being on the road, going really fast. They had things like really long stems, so they can make the frame shorter and use a longer stem, so you've got a good size, but then you've got a really short frame, so you can get closer to the rider in front. And also the tubes are shorter in the frame, so it's a bit lighter, which are good benefits for a road bike. And then those brands started making a mountain bike with the same, they just started off with the same equipment they had. And it's been like a slow 30-year process of just like slowly changing, like stem getting shorter,
Reach
frame getting longer, wheel Where if I don't know when mountain bike first died, early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, 85.
Mm-hmm.
If they took motocross bikes at the time, which were already pretty good for their off-road purpose, if we started with a motorbike company who started making a mountain bike, I think we would have been in a more similar place to where we are now 25 years ago, and we would have spent years refining. But it's taken 30 years to get to like sort of the base level to then improve things further.
But still, like looking at your bike, it's kind of a drastic difference to what we have now. You're running 200 mil of travel front rear. You're pedaling it up hills. I assume you're not having exo tires on it.
No, full downhill tires.
So you brought up the point that it's not fair from manufacturers marketing a bike ridden in the EWS, EDR, and selling it to customers maybe in a different spec, which is not as capable or able to take the hits in a similar way. But think of, again, the riders not being able to push it like the pros do. Would it be like a downside or a drawback for them to run these kind of heavy tires because they potentially never would need them?
Well, this is why I like using the motocross example, because everyone buys the same motocross bike to start with.
It has a motor, so it wouldn't like.
But they change it to their. I don't know. You buy a motocross bike and it's got standard tires on. But if your local track is a sand track, you buy sand tires for it. Or if you ride super muddy, you buy spiky mud tires for it. So I think the component choices are sort of location dependent.
But still, you say that they should sell you a different kind of product because you cracked so many. Did you just like crack parts or also crack the frames?
All the frames.
The frames.
The bike companies can't be upset if you've been using it for the purpose they say it's for and then it breaks.
Nothing will hold up if the time period is long enough. And then I think it's racing. So what's your frame is weighing?
Sorry?
How much does your frame weigh?
I don't know. Off the top
overall
of my head.
The overall bike?
Well, I've got 3. They were 19 kilos average.
Do you think that would be acceptable for all users out there?
Well, what will they accept it?
If you can make some crazy measurements like with how much watt and energy you need to put in to get this kind of bike and this amount of way up the mountain. And then it's surprisingly that it's not as much as you would guess of a difference. Of course, if you have a full-on cross-country bike with kind of semi-slick tires, sub 10 kilos, it will be easier to get up the trail. But on the other hand, you're making like drawbacks if you like going into the first section of rocks or slippery ground. So it's always a compromise. But I'm thinking if you have like this bike to rule them all and it works for you, would people still have the same amount of fun, or would just like say, even if they are down to ride it and try it in person without having a somewhat pre-molded opinion on it by just looking at it or looking at numbers, which is always a problem, But if they would ride it, do you think they could? The average Joe would enjoy it in the same way. Even you say it's easier to ride fast, but is this maybe something that people are looking for?
Well, I think if they came to ride, obviously I've built that bike to suit the places that I ride the most, which are sort of hardcore enduro trails in Finale area and bike park, big mountain, alpine stuff. So yeah, I think if people were riding it in the same locations that I was in, yeah, they would have the same good feeling from it. If it was one of my mates back home in Birmingham riding around Cannock Chase Trail Centre, they wouldn't enjoy it. But if I was building them a bike to ride their trails in Cannock Chase, I would have the same geometry.
You would ride back home like in Birmingham. You would love to ride the same bikes, or would you change something?
I'd have the same geometry. I'd just have
different components.
Yeah, less travel, lighter weight, lighter tires. The aspects of the bike that determine how it handles for me should be the same anywhere. Geometry would be the same, handlebar width would be the same, stem length would be the same. Seat height would be the same. And I'll just make like the main. Well, it'd be lighter, so you can pedal it around a 30-kilometer trail centre more easily without getting a shuttle up and then riding down really rough, fast stuff. So you can have lighter tyres because you don't need such durable, tough tyres for Cannock Chase, for example. The suspension balance would be adjusted more. So when I ride it here, the suspension balance is determined by the average descent of the trail. When you're climbing, if you're in a shuttle, it doesn't matter. Or if you're climbing with a lockout switch on, you're just cruising up, your suspension balance doesn't matter. So if you're then going back to Cannock Chase, where it's essentially flat because you start and finish in the same point, the bike would be balanced more towards, well, in this case, it'd be balanced more towards the front of the bike.
Do you think that this kind of bike you've made is, in marketing terms, somewhat of, let's come up with a new category? Would this be a solution to actually sell it into the market or to make it more popular?
Well, if your marketing team's good enough, you can sell anything.
Yeah, but what would it be? Like we had like a couple of years ago, like everybody had like, oh, you need to have an enduro race bike. And this term, or before that, enduro didn't really exist. And then we are old enough to know that we had terms like, oh, I'm riding a mountain bike tour. Then we had something like maybe all mountain, trail riding, down country, you name it, like, and all the way up to enduro. So people and brands agreed to have somewhat of an understanding of a category, a bike that has to have certain specifications, geometry, whatsoever, and then you just smash a label on it. This is now enduro, down country, whatever. So your concept, while I haven't written it, I have written like similar ideas, but not to that extent and to that degree of like chainstay length. So I'm not daring to have a real opinion if it's actually working or not, but trusting your word on that, and just by like having somewhat of a brain exercise, just thinking of the mountain bike scene.
Is it a category name?
Yeah.
Name to categorize it.
Rule them all. One bike to rule them all.
Well, really, it's like I would call it like I don't like this term, but a super enduro.
A super enduro, okay.
It's like an actual super enduro because you can ride full on downhill bike parks on it. And you can ride any kind of enduro trails. You can ride on that bike, you can ride anything really from Champouille World Cup track, which I have rode on it, to even like, how do you describe it? Like light enduro, medium enduro. Again, I don't like the category names. I think it's too confusing.
Would you change the frame material?
I'd like to have a alloy or carbon mainframe. I would keep the steel rear
Because of how it behaves, flexes.
The grip's just too much. Too good.
Is this something that is underestimated? Like the give of the actual frame? And you're saying you might, if you have maybe the resources or like a manufacturer that's now willing enough, you would put up a more direct front triangle, because this is maybe the most flexiest part, because by the nature of it has the longest tubes. And then I wonder if you would have like the same ride quality with a carbon rear end. I assume potentially not, because you wouldn't have that kind of give to it like steel has.
Well, yeah, it depends how the rear end was engineered. I'm sure with the right engineer with carbon, you could get close to that feeling or similar. Yeah, the front end could possibly be stiffer, but also I've got three different bikes we're talking about now. So the first steel one is like really good for everything. The titanium one is softer, more forgiving. It does struggle a bit in the bike park, like big sort of G-out turns. But then I've got the Sun Radical replica copy, and that's really stiff. It's got the double twin top tubes, and that's really stiff. It's also got a much stiffer swing arm. I'd like the front end from the Sun, the stiffest front end, the softest rear end. But without actually trying it, I'm not sure, because you might lose some of the other qualities of it.
Have you ever been in contact with Nico Guyot or Fabian Barel about this kind of things?
Yeah, a lot.
Have they ridden it?
No. Fabian's rode it around the car park in Finale and did some trials on it. And he loved it. Well, he didn't. He was like, oh, amazing. He's like, it's great to see someone doing something different. I was like, he's like, oh, what have you done? Like, I made the chainstay really long. I was like, it's amazing for balance. He's like, yeah, it makes sense. I was like, do a track stand on it. He's like, obviously he's an expert at doing track stands. He's like a trials rider as well. He's like, yeah, that's really good for doing track stands. And my track standing ability, which wasn't very good, was like quadrupled.
Okay.
I don't know if that has any bearing on what it's like riding down the trail, but if you can track stand on it easily, balance on it easily, it's got to be easier to balance on the trail.
Would you actually also be willing, now talking about Fabian, he's involved in the Canyon R&D department. So, and he's also known for sizing up rather than riding sizes they would actually recommend for his height. So if he would now come up and say, okay, let's try to make this somewhat into the Canyon lineup, would you also like say, okay, I'm selling it, or is this something you sit on? And maybe at some point making your own brand out of it?
Well, I would like to, it'd be good to get some kind of reward for it. But really, it's just making the tube longer, isn't it?
It's interesting that
I need an acronym. I need a patent, don't I? An acronym.
Yeah, a category. Super. That's what I tried to get out of you. Like you said, super enduro. So
yeah, it's a bit more than Super Enduro, Super MTB.
The funny part is that Canyon made a similar bike to the concept bike I did, like with the short travel and long reach and long chainstay, super slack head angle. And I test rode one, and they made it out of carbon, and it was insanely stiff, like beat you up kind of stiff. And I was like, wow, I don't know if I would be actually happy riding this like for longer and longer descents. And I still have like my concept bike in my basement, and from time to time I pull them out and try it. And I just recently, almost 2 years ago, I put a Kiss on it, the Kleber Kiss, which enhanced it even more. And even though the bike, or actually it's an alloy frame, and because I've ridden it so much, it even turned softer now, which is noticeable on the trail, but it's not a bad thing. It's actually beneficial. So Canyon wasn't able to pull it off with a similar bike and a super rigid carbon frame, and it didn't catch on, like for people. And this also made me think, with these kind of concepts, how hard it is to actually sell it to customers or building a fan base. Because you think of kind of a category like, let's say, cross country or whatever, enduro, and then you can constantly sell to these target groups. But there's maybe a very nerdy, specific kind of target group that maybe you and I are part of, that's not out there, or not, there's no offering for those kind of people.
Yeah. Do you think it's the bike that determines the kind of customer, or do you think it's the brand that chooses what kind of product they're going to sell to a customer?
You may do it in all worst marketing terms and say, like, you tell the people what they want. And if you tell them long enough what they want, they will actually have the urge to purchase it. So
yeah, like if you wanted to, you could market my bike as the ultimate slope style bike.
Yeah.
And if you marketed it enough, and you got enough pro riders doing backflips on them, and enough cool images and marketing, then people would be like, "Oh my god, I need that free ride bike, that slope style bike."
If you look at what people are using out there, and if you go into a bigger, let's say, trail center area or going into a bike park, I don't want to pick on people, but it's like the bikes actually, or mostly, are so capable, and you feel like they had been marketed a bike towards them that might be over their skill set somewhat, which is fine. You don't need, like, if you have a downhill bike and just cruise down a bike park, that's totally fine. But the bike can do more. And the question is, I always ask myself, would this person actually have more fun on a bike that somewhat is like easier to maneuver or lift off lips, rather than meant to be like ridden twice as fast?
I think you definitely want a bike that's more capable than you.
Really? Always?
Well, if you don't want to hurt yourself. Yeah.
Fair enough. Now, the thing is,
well, for two reasons. If you don't want to hurt yourself, you want a bike that's more capable of you. And if you want to improve, you want a bike that's more capable than you. Because it's really hard incredibly hard to ride, to improve yourself when you're at the limit of the bike.
I think I can agree to disagree on that, because I'm maybe a little bit of a person that like to be underbiked, to actually give myself somewhat of a hard time to increase my skill set. Like, I don't want to like always blame the bike that is not capable enough. And I always think the bike, even though it has shorter travel, is more capable than I am. Maybe I'm wrong, but this is just a concept.
Is it the bike itself or the setup that's more important?
It's harder to set up a bike which is less capable in regards of geometry or travel. Maybe more in regards of travel and tires. But you can set up a short travel bike somewhat that you are in somewhat of a comfort zone, even though going fast on it. The concept bike I built is also it's only 120 in the rear, 140 in the front, but it has somewhat downhill geometry with a 62.5 head angle. So while you're feeling super confident going fast, you at some point will get like issues like, okay, can I keep contact on the pedals? Because it's shaking so much. Or is my vision stable enough to see the trail, or getting just rumbled around so much? This was the limiting factor on this kind of bike. But it was very stable and maybe similar to what you're explaining. If you're going into a turn and it just like stays there, being balanced, like you don't have to do any jerky movements, like adjusting your center of gravity, leaning forward, going backward. It just stay there, and you just put it at an angle and it will turn. Maybe not as abrupt as a more regular geometry, but it will do what you want.
Yeah,
and it's predictable. This is what I'm looking into a bike.
I just want it to be as comfortable as possible.
Yeah.
Again, depends on your local trails and what you're riding. Like, I could take my BMX and ride it down some of the trails in Finale.
We did that as kids. We did
bloody
that as
terrified.
kids. Yeah, sure. We were terrified. Like we were 5 years old on a BMX, and we just like we played Dare You, and who would ride down the big staircase in the middle of the town, like, and you would shit your pants, and you would do it, and you somehow survived, even though you haven't had any breaks. Like and still we had a blast, and this is something you can't underestimate. Like you can always, no matter what kind of bike you have, you can still have a blast. And there's different ways to actually improve your riding experience, either maybe what I did, like, okay, I'm underbiked, but I'm trying to improve my skill set, dancing the blade kind of, and riding down gnarly stuff on it. Or as you said, I'm super comfortable going fast on it, and the bike will never ever hold me back, and I have plenty of room or error because I have so much travel and such a stable geometry. It's two ways to actually improve your riding and have a better experience.
But if you're riding your bike on the limit, are you really improving your skills, or are you just learning to hold on better? And like, you're actually improving like your cornering technique. Because if you want to improve your cornering technique, the best thing to do is just go down the road where there's no trail, because you can isolate your technique, and then you can move it onto the trail.
True.
Whereas you're just putting yourself in a really difficult situation.
If you're
underbiking.
I'm actually making my life harder. But maybe it's the same like going to an e-bike or a regular bike. It's maybe I could have it easier going up the hills, but and it's harder to climb stuff on a regular bike. But I'm maybe more happy to have a bike that is 5 kilos lighter, because the handling is different. Even though the heavy bike also have certain benefits in handling and riding, that they're just different, and I can also enjoy these. But it's it's maybe all a matter of taste.
Yeah, so I would always just go for more capability from the bike. If you're talking about suspension settings, say you're a downhill racer and you want to go faster, you set your bike up with a suitable amount of compression for the speed that you're riding at. And the suitable amount is basically as hard as you can push into the bike, it's returning the same amount of force in like low speed compression terms. And in high speed compression terms, as fast as you can hit really sharp edged bumps, it can slow the wheel down enough that the wheel doesn't come off the ground and stays attached to the bump. But so you're this downhill racer and you're trying to improve to be a faster racer. You're riding at this certain speed and you've got the correct setup for you. To ride over that limit to make yourself faster is really difficult. Whereas if you go to a harder suspension setting, it's then easier to ride up to it, which is what the top guys at the World Cup do. If you listen to Bruni in some interviews, other riders, if you talk to mechanics like Nigel Reeve, it's like race runs, they get 2 extra clicks because they're going to be pushing harder and they're going to be pushing up to the limit of the bike. Whereas it's really hard to ride over the limit of the bike. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think G once explained it in a way that over the course of a race weekend, he's working himself up to this kind of settings you're explaining, like having that little extra. And then you're pushing so much force into the bike, and you know every line, you know every hit. And then you're giving this 5% extra on your race run, and you're having this 5% of higher force, to put an analogy in it. And then you make your race run, and then maybe you have a resting day, and you pull the bike out 2 days later, and you're riding your local bike park, and it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
It's because the amount of force and how you are able to cope with that is different. And you need to adapt for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what we maybe come as a somewhat of a conclusion is that bikes offer many, many ways of actually being adjusted to a certain terrain and riding style. And we both maybe can agree that companies are not pushing hard enough or experimenting to a degree that would actually be beneficial to what kind of offerings we have out there in the market.
Yeah, experimenting is not very good for business.
Yeah, we could dive now even deeper, like thinking of having a prototype out there looking maybe odd because it has a longer chainstay, and we have so much media. Everyone has a smartphone. It would end up in the internet somewhere, and people would see it, and then maybe sales of the current model will be like slowing down because everybody thinks, oh, they're already working on a new model. Maybe I'm holding back my purchasing decision. It's up for you.
my last word on the long chainstay is the way people talk about it online and in person. They talk about it like this unbelievably long, like Titanic. You're like, it's not that much different. It's like, imagine your bike's like this long. My bike's like this long.
Yeah.
It's not actually extreme, or it's like that much.
Yeah.
It's like it'll never go around corners. What? It's like still a tiny change.
It behaves different.
And to me, it just feels normal. And it's not like it's a really long chainstay. No, I'm just like, all the other chainstays were too short. I've got a normal one, finally.
Yeah.
Like I say, people, and I include myself, it becomes normal, doesn't it? Everything becomes normal. Yeah, a super short chainstay is excellent on a road bike. It's short, stiff, super for accelerating up a road.
Yeah, back in the day, Specialized always, like, it was 420 was like the go-to measurement, and they pushed this narrative so hard for many years. And I think we both went to a press camp. Let's not say the brand, but we were both there, and we had this kind of question to them why they don't put longer chainstays on the extra larges, and they admitted that Specialized has such a marketing force. If they would push a different narrative at the dealer level, the customer would be alienated by their approach, and they wouldn't have the amount of force communication-wise to explain it that they would actually believe it. Even though they would buy brand B, they still are influenced by the narrative of brand S.
Yeah.
And this is something that's maybe pretty much underestimated.
Yeah. I'm trying to think who that was now. Which press camp it was.
It was at Lake Garda.
Yeah. Lake Garda. Terrifying. The worst place. Any bike brand that's going to launch a bike where the goal is we're going to take 20 journalists who've just flown in from all over the world or driven overnight. They've got a brand new bike. We gave them way too much free alcohol last night. And then we're going to take them out at 7 o'clock in the morning, put them on a brand new bike. No, we're going to take them into a 2-hour school lesson first with too much coffee. School lesson in a classroom. Put them on a brand new bike. Send them to the top of a hill in Lake Garda, where it's just the greasiest, slippiest, horrible, baby head, rolling boulders. Don't do it. If you're a bike brand, don't ever take your riders to Lake Garda. Take them somewhere easy and smooth and fun, and they'll think your bike's amazing. One last thing to say about the geometry, then we can wrap up. My ridiculously long unrideable bike is still shorter than my electric KTM freeride bike. I'm not sure, I'll have to measure it. I think the wheelbase is similar or shorter than my Sur-Ron, little kids, teenagers motorbike. And the distance between the pedals and the grips on my massive unrideable bike is smaller than the Sur-Ron. The Sur-Ron's bigger than my bike, that bike still.
Means like all the Sur-Ron, all the electric motorbikes are all unrideable.
Just massive. My girlfriend is like, I don't know how tall in centimetres, like 5 foot tall. 160 maybe, tiny, extra small mountain bike. She rides the Sur-Ron around the field, no problem. Really, really comfortable.
That's not true. That's a lie. That's not gonna work.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Thank you for taking the time and nerding out on geometry.
Good old mountain bike ramble. About bikes.
It's quite niche. So
that's where you learn the most, I think, in these rambling conversations. You always find some little interesting bits that can help you.
Yeah, thank you
solve
again.
Some problems, discover some things.
Perfect. Yeah, and as said, next year I really need to make that visit, and then I can swing a leg over this unrideable bike.
You're welcome anytime.
Thank you, Paul.
Great, thanks, Jens.
Subscribe to this channel to not miss the future episodes.